Hi, I'm Dan Schinder on Drum Talk TV. Thank you very much for joining me. I've got a very special guest, another one, James Gadson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, really appreciate it. Had the pleasure of seeing you play the other night. Wow.
Yeah, we were out at the Dirty Bull a gentleman by the name of Bill Lynch, who used to play with Bonnie Raitt, and he purchased the club, and it's his club, and he plays in it, so it's great. We can kind of play what we want to play.
Yeah,
so
and you sure did. It was great. And we're going to touch more on that. We're also going to talk about James' old days, playing with everybody from Freddie King to Albert King, B.B. King. You never played with Burger King, did you?
No.
Okay, good. And
they taste all right, though.
He played with Sir Paul McCartney in 2005. Played with the Temptations back in, 73 was that? In the 1990 album.
Right.
He's been around a little bit. He's one of the absolute most recorded R&B drummers. What a great career.
I've been truly blessed.
Well, I want to ask you something. We'll start with drumming in general first. And, I had this conversation earlier today. We were talking about when you hear a jazz drummer, or the term jazz drummer, you get like an audible picture in your head or your ear, like, okay, jazz drumming. A heavy metal drummer or hard rock drummer. Right away, you know what heavy metal is, you know what hard rock drumming is, and so on. I think for a lot of people, a lot of drummers, when they hear R&B drummer, because R&B has changed so much from the old days of the 60s and 70s to what R&B is now that's being put out, it's kind of almost a different genre than it was back then, right?
You kind of wonder what is R&B,
right?
The way they've labeled a lot of things now.
Exactly, and that kind of dovetails on my question, James, is what to you are the ingredients that make an R&B drummer these days?
These days, well...
And compared to your days?
Wow, well, these days, there are a lot of drum machine made records of R&B, the so-called R&B, and these days live, the younger guys, they're not playing a lot of pocket stuff, groove stuff. They're playing a lot of technical stuff. So that might be one of the things that that's relevant today.
Whereas the music we saw the other night, the old school R&B, there's a bit of shuffle mixed in. There's some different grooves, and like you said, it's more pocket based, right?
Right, more pocket based. Everything live is maybe show, because most of the R&B stuff that's cut, most of it, maybe 99.5%, they're using the drum machines. They're using the drum machines.
Right.
So
and sequencing and things like that too, right?
Live, they're using the drummers.
Right.
They use the, I guess, the pocket, for whatever pocket they're getting for the drum machines.
Right.
So
now, for the sake of taking advantage of James' long career and just such a robust time span of things that you've been involved in over the years, I mean, when just comparing alone, working with the Temptations in 73 on one hand, working with Paul McCartney in 2005, I think it's fair to say that we could make a lot of comparisons in this interview simply for everybody's edification, just to educate them on the differences between how studio sessions are run now compared to then, how things were recorded, and we'll get into some more technical stuff in your control room later. But how would you describe any differences, or the main differences, if any, of working with a group like the Temptations back in 73 compared to something that's a bit more contemporary, even though he's old school, Paul McCartney's been around forever, but you know what I mean, working in the new millennia?
Well, then working with the Temptations, maybe we would see the Temptations when we were cutting the tracks, doing the music. It was always an arranger and a producer. And out here in Los Angeles, 9 times out of 10, the music was written out. The hi-hat, open, close, the toms, everything, the cymbal swirls, everything was written out then. And from what I heard, and I talked to a lot of them, I had a pleasure and honor to meet a lot of the Motown musicians. In fact, I think one of the last gigs that Bob Babbitt, one of the bass players of Motown, did, we were in Europe together. So he told me a lot of things about how they did stuff.
How the sessions went down and everything.
And with Paul McCartney, it was just he and I and whoever else that he brought in that day. And he would kind of tell me what he wanted or what he didn't want. I would
Right.
come up with some stuff, and he said, "Well, no, don't play that." They had a producer, and the producer spoke certain things, but he had a lot to do with it
Right.
too. And it wasn't written out per se. I mean, Paul knew what he wanted when he came in. I had to try to figure out what he wanted.
Yeah.
I had to try to figure that out.
So was there a bit more licensing working with Paul as far as he brought you in, obviously, I'm thinking, because he liked your sound and everything, gave you enough information about the piece you're going to be working on so that you can be you, but within the confines of what he wanted for the piece, versus coming into a session where you're reading note for note exactly how the writer and arranger wanted it done, right?
Right. I think they kind of wanted to see. There was a producer there. There was a famous producer there, the gentleman that produced Radiohead, Nigel Goodrich.
Mm-hmm.
He was there. And so they kind of wanted me, like you said, versus what he was doing.
Right.
So I would play certain things, and if they could use them, or with this direction, or well, maybe let's go this direction.
Right.
They wouldn't say that, but you could tell the way that the music was being made.
Yeah.
How to try to change something.
Right.
So it was very interesting. Very interesting.
It must have been great. I mean, working with a guy like that with
well,
so
hey,
much
he's the
history.
biggest pop star in the world. It was great. I mean, and I was able to ask him about a lot of things, and he was very cordial in telling me. I'd asked him about. I said, "Well, man, what made you come up with Yesterday?" He said, "Man, well, yesterday she had pretty legs." He said, "But yesterday that's a great subject." So he would start writing that. I would ask him about different things, and he said, he would tell me about that. He said, Little Richard was the one that really helped him out a lot of times. And, a lot of different things. He was very cordial about that. Where in Motown, it was the music and the producers, and
It was just all business.
Yeah.
Get into your business, get the heck out.
Right. So it wasn't too much of,
Yeah. It's nice that he was that open with you. And
He was,
took the time with you.
I was really an honor.
How'd you get that gig, if you don't mind me asking?
I was recording with Beck.
Okay.
And Nigel Goodrich was producing Beck, and he said, "Well, man, how would you like to play?" I said, "Man, what? I can't believe it. You get to play on the call."
Yeah, what does someone say to that? Let me think about it. Let me check my schedule.
Right. I couldn't believe it because, I didn't get those kind of calls. I got,
Right.
it wasn't that type of a call. I mean, I work with musicians and artists, as great as he was, but not in that genre. So I
Right.
didn't get that call. So he said, "Okay, wow."
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was very excited about that.
Yeah, what a great experience.
Yeah.
How about working with Mr. Quincy Jones? What was that like?
Quincy was very. He knew what he wanted, and he had it kind of outlined. He wanted to see what you would do with it, but not so much.
Mm-hmm.
He had it pretty much outlined of what he wanted to go down, and he and the engineer. I mean, they were more or less sound conscious.
Right.
He had the great engineers working with him, and they would know. Whatever happened, they wanted to make sure that they got this certain sound as well as the performance.
Right.
So he was great. He and a lot of times, the times that I worked with him, I've worked with him 2 or 3 times, and the first time I got to work with Herbie Hancock, I think, and I had worked with Herbie Hancock after that, was Quincy called him in on a date that we did on one of his albums.
Right.
And so that was it was exciting, and Quincy worked from a lot of he didn't the stuff that I did with him. Very seldom there was stuff was written out.
Right.
He would come from the top of his head. He'd tell you, say, "Just play, I just want this simple thing, or just play this." He had it in his head
Right.
what he wanted.
And then you all helped him materialize it, make it materialize, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah. What would you tell young drummers just sort of starting out? When I say just starting out, I mean maybe they've been playing 0 to 5 years. And what would you tell drummers who have been playing 30 to 50 years that think they know it all on the subject of learning to read music? How important is that?
That is very, very important, because you never know when you might need that.
Right.
You know, because I mean, say if you with a group and they get a hit record, and so people will start calling you for certain things. You don't know. I mean,
and you might not have much notice.
Right. I mean,
to listen to something a lot.
I was not a reader when I came out here. Although I went to school, I played trumpet in high school, but I went out the back door a lot of days. Yeah. You know, I was a juvenile delinquent. Mm-hmm. But when I came out here, and I had done some what they call scab sessions. That would mean non-union sessions.
Right. Right.
And I had the honor and the pleasure of working with Motown. A contractor called me one day. He said, "Man, we've been looking for you for 2 years. Can you read music?" I said, "Yeah." I was lying. So
whatever gets the job, right? And you'll learn and do it.
So I go in the studio and I see all these famous people that I've seen on the back of these album covers.
Right.
I'm mystified. I'm just scared.
What kind of people were there?
Oh man, I mean, you had the Joe Samples and the Mike Melverns.
Right.
You had all these different people that had played on all these different records. I mean, even Larry Graham was in there.
And what time period is this roughly?
This was the 70s.
Okay.
And you had all these famous musicians that I had seen on the back of these albums. Not speaking about Jamerson yet. I hadn't worked with him yet, but he had come out from Detroit. Right. And so they're reading this music. Now, I didn't think, by me being from a country town, Kansas City, in that period of time, I mean, in the 30s, Kansas City was a big jazz thing, but later, that left. Mm-hmm. I didn't figure, they needed to read this, rock and roll and R&B stuff, whatever you call it. So I didn't think nothing about it. And so I was just, I was ossified. I was scared.
You got hit over the head with that.
Yeah. What saved me was my timing. They said, "Well, hey, we'll keep him because his timing is good." But I got books and stuff, and I went home and I took some private lessons. I got that together. I said, because you need that,
Yeah.
But then later on, people stopped doing that. They weren't. To me, the records in the '70s records were better made. It's more musical than what they're doing now. Of course, evolution takes over. I mean, they got the synthesizers and all these different things. So it's a whole different thing. I'm not knocking none of it. Mm-hmm. It's all good.
Different.
Yeah, it's all good. But I got that together, and then what happens was they called me for some movie scores. Mm. One of them was the Bee Gees thing. That I did that one, and some other ones. And the guys, they had me in a booth, the drum booth,
right?
Because they didn't think I could read. They didn't know, and they got all these 30 or 40 pieces sitting around and cutting the score. Right. And they had the music in there anyway, so I read it. Said, well, we should have had this guy here 2 or 3 days ago. We didn't think he could read. So it was a plus.
So it paid off.
Yeah, it paid off. And so I think that is very important. That and all, drummers should, most drummers, good drummers, should know something about the piano.
Right.
So that I think that's
great.
A must.
Thanks, because that comes up in conversation all the time.
Right.
With all these drum forums I belong to online. And
there are some great drummers that don't read. I'm not going to call anybody's names because I don't want to say that, or it's.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have great people that are just great that don't do that.
Right.
But I think that you should.
That it does help. Yeah.
So
you come out pretty young from Kansas City. Right. Right. And you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you came out as a jazz musician.
Yes, I did.
What was the evolution? Like, what were some of the first gigs? What was it like getting work at first? And then how did you evolve into R&B and blues?
Well, when I first came out here, there were some gentlemen that were on the Dean Martin show from my hometown. I said, man, they successful. They made it. So they called me and said, come on out. Everything is cool. I came out. It was pretty rough because I had just gotten married, and I figured they had a place for me to stay and everything. I'm staying in one of the gentleman's sister's apartment who was on vacation in Kansas City, and I had to get out of there. We had to get out of there, so I'm just broke, and it was rough, And I worked. I mean, there was so many stores. I mean, you'd get apartments easier then. I would go from apartment to apartment. I mean, how the guys would be waiting on the rent some nights with their door cracked open, they go to sleep. I'd have to sneak out and go. It was. I hated to do that, but that's what it was.
Yeah,
It was,
and you mentioned you would walk like 80 blocks for a
I worked.
$17 gig.
I would walk 75 or 80 blocks to sit in so somebody could hear me, hoping that I would get a gig.
Right.
And I finally did get a gig, playing for $17 from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon.
Wow.
And it was a jazz gig. And, the good thing about it was all the famous musicians that were living, Cannonball, Coltrane never came by, but a lot of, they came, and so that was a good experience.
Right.
And,
well, I think it speaks of your desire. There's so many guys and girls out there grinding it out. Maybe they have a day job, maybe they're unemployed, and they're either what we call weekend warriors, or they're grinding out gigs 4 or 5 times a day. They're practicing every other day, and there's sometimes this complaint. And before anybody starts sending emails, yeah, believe me, I know all musicians at that level are all underpaid. But my point is the attitude to be taken, and you don't want to let your frustration get in the way of your desire, or you'll never be able to let happen what you were able to do.
I mean, it was a blessing. I mean, I did have some day jobs. I wasn't good at them. One guy, they had a job and was paying $35 a week, and that was no money then. But I took whatever I could get. Right. But one of the gentlemen there said, "Hey man, I'm gonna show you how you make your money." He said, "What we do was a place where they had cameras and movie projectors at that time. They were stealing." I said, "No, I can't do that. I can't do it."
Good.
So they had a new manager to come in, and he wanted some of his buddies to work. So he wanted me to work overtime, and he said, you just will be here overtime, I ain't gonna pay you. He just wanted to get me out of the way. So he said, I said, well, I can't do it. But he said, well, you're fired.
It just worked out for the best.
Yeah. So it was. Then I did the post office for a minute.
Right.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried a lot of different things, but it's a blessing because a lot of times I can see and I sympathize with the the musicians. Period.
Yeah.
To have the day jobs because hey, in the you work all day, and in the evening, you might love it. And you might do it for a while, but you can get tired.
Yeah. And I saw a post the other day that really rang home because I, like everybody, grinded it out for so long. Right around here, we're in L.A., out in California, right near where I was born. You live in the area here where I was born, and I played all over Sunset, all the clubs and everything. And this thing that I saw said, okay, so the typical musician these days, after coming home from work from his day job, drives a $500 car full of $3,000 worth of gear to a gig to make $50.
Right.
And that's tough.
That's right.
That's tough.
Right. So
and there's so much talent out there.
So how long will that desire last?
Right. Right.
That's pretty rough on a person.
So let's do a complete rewind from playing with Paul McCartney in 2005, the stuff you're doing now, the stuff you did in '73. Go all the way back to you're in Kansas City, and why the drums? And who were some of your first influences? And I say this because, and I'm not saying you're old, but I just think this will be a history lesson for some people. It is
what it is, right?
I think it's important to know Papa Joe Jones and Max Roach and and whoever your influences are. I think it's very important to know your music.
I knew of all these people, but I wasn't a drummer. I didn't start playing really professional drums until I was 21. I was a singer. I came up doing a doo-wop era, and I just was thinking that I would probably make it. Right. Doing that. So, unbeknownst to me, when I went into the Air Force, my brother picked up the guitar, and I didn't know this the whole time I was in the Air Force, 4 years. He had a band. We had sang together, we had a group, and we had made some records on the federal label. We were on the same label as James Brown was on, but my mother wouldn't let me go on the road. We were too young. I'm glad she did now that I've seen everything.
Right.
But we made some records, and we could have been out there working, but my mother just wouldn't let us. But when I got out of the Air Force, he had a band. And so the bass player left and went with a famous pianist from Kansas City named J. Mac Shan. And the drummer was a bass player. Anyway, he could play bass. He didn't want to play drums anymore. So I had to get that together right quick. I had played this, drum and bugle corps stuff. Right. I knew nothing about sitting down and playing.
With a kit.
Right.
Yeah.
I had no
keeping
idea.
the groove. Did you have natural rhythm? Did you fall right into it, or was it a bit of a struggle?
It was a little struggle. It was different. But my brother, being it was my brother, he sympathized with me and let me, because what I was doing at first, I would stand up and dance, and I was the front man. I would sing and dance.
Right.
So I got the drums.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
So I'm painting that picture in my head because I know what you look like now. And while I'm sitting taller than James, he's actually a foot taller than me. This is the first interview I've ever done where I'm sitting higher than the guest. So picturing you dance and being a front man, that must have been a hell of a show. I mean, the presence, that you must have taken on the stage.
Well, I had to. I mean, and I had sang before I was a doo-wop, so we could do the steps and stuff, and
Right.
do the, Little Richard was popular and different things. We were doing this different, so it was all right.
Yeah.
It was cool.
And what drumming influences were the first to sort of make you say, you know what, I want to stick with this. I want to grind it out and play like that
my
guy.
father was a drummer.
Okay.
But he didn't want me to be in the music business. He was, his excuse was, "Don't touch my drums."
Sounds like me and my kids.
Because he had a pretty rough time, and he didn't read music,
Mm-hmm.
and in fact, he didn't even drive a car. So it was, he bought me a cornet. They had these cornets then. I wish I had it now, because it would probably be worth a lot of money. It was about this, one of those,
Right.
They had for the orchestras that they played years ago.
Yeah.
And I struggled with that because I didn't have this tooth. I have a gold tooth right here now. I didn't have that tooth, so they had what they call an armature. So
Right.
they wanted me the teacher want me to build up the armature.
Right, the way your mouth fits on the mouthpiece.
And so he said, "Well, hey, the only thing I can tell you to do is bend your lip over, and so you can see if you can hit these notes." I was having it just wasn't working. It wasn't working. So I hated it, but I went along with it. It just I played the marches and stuff, but I couldn't get up above C.
Right.
So it was pretty cold. And so I went into the Air Force. I had some, I figured it was best for me to do that. I was a juvenile delinquent in a way of speaking. So the best thing I said, I better get away from this crowd and go into the Air Force. And,
So there wasn't a draft at the time. It was just something you enlisted yourself.
well, it was a draft later on, I think, but I enlisted myself.
And thanks for serving, by the way. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was great, except coming up with reading the music again.
Yeah.
Some of the guys I went to school with volunteered for the Air Force. They could read. I didn't. I was lazy. I didn't study. So when they had the tests, I couldn't pass it on the trumpet. They had the bugles and stuff. I couldn't pass it, so I had to work in supply, what they call it, which wasn't so bad later on, but
Yeah. And they got to go play with band.
Yeah, so they got to play in the Air Force band, and they got to
Right.
do certain things.
Yeah.
I mean, later on, I played. We got together a singing group, and we won a lot of the shows that they had, and we were on our way to what they call Tops of the Pops. That was the tops of the, if you win that, then all you did was work
Yeah.
all over the world on the Air Force bases.
Yeah.
But one of the guys, he just got disinterested and he didn't want to do it, so it broke up the group and everybody was sad. But that's what happened with that. So I was fortunate enough to be into some kind of music after hours. So when I got out and I started playing with my brother, and I'd ask all the drummers in town about how to do this, that, and the other, and I practice.
Right.
And I went on the road with my brother. He had a band. We were on the road, and we were just novices. I mean, we had worked around town, and we were big in my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And this promoter called us. He was from Georgia. And he wanted us to come down and play. We had no idea what was going on. He wasn't cool. So they had us going into these different
Wait,
towns.
a promoter that was shifty?
Yeah, he was very
That's
shifty.
weird. I never heard of that.
We went to these towns, and he wanted us to be Otis Redding in the South. Now, this is where Otis Redding is famous and popular.
Yeah.
William Bell, different places. A lot of places we got ran out of. It was pretty rough.
Really?
Yeah, it was. It was tough. And we didn't. Some of the places it was cool, and he would claim he didn't make no money. Man, we didn't. We'd be riding on about to eat the candy bars and the sardines.
Yeah.
We went through that.
He didn't make any money, and you made
He
less,
said he didn't
right?
make. He said he didn't make.
Yeah,
any
and
money.
you made less than
We
that.
see the place packed.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna pay you. Don't worry about it. I'm gonna to pick up the check at the bank. So I don't know what was going on. So, for some reason or another, Florida. We were in Florida, and my brother and all of them decided they wanted to go back to Kansas City. I don't know why I wanted to stay.
Something just told you to stay,
Say
though, and
stay.
stick it out?
Yeah, stay and stick it out. And I still didn't have my craft together Is I didn't have it together, but I would get some substitution jobs sometimes. It was Florida was this was before it got integrated, and
things were different then. What time period is this? Like early 60s?
This was in the 60s.
Okay.
But they had a club called the Peppermint Lounge out on the Strip that all the R&B acts went to. So the guys in the bands would get those gigs. I didn't get none of them. I'd sub for them in town. And so one time it was a group called the Midnighters, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. He was the originator of the Twist. It wasn't Chubby Checker. It was him.
A Drum Talk TV nugget. How about that? I don't think many people know that.
Right. He was, you think Prince was risque? These guys were risque. They had songs out called Work With Me, Annie, Annie Had a Baby, and all kind of different things. But
especially for back then. I mean, that's, wow.
Right. Yeah, it was pretty rough. But they were great dancers and singers, and they put on a good act. So they said, well, hey, the Midnighters need a drummer. So I said, okay. So I got the gig, and that's where I learned that shuffle. Because that was the kind of all that stuff was shuffle.
Yeah.
I didn't have a hi hat then. I just had a kick, snare, a ride.
So it made it all work with less tools.
Yeah.
And I bet that made you better too.
Well, yeah, in a way, because the band we would practice Coltrane all during the day, and at night we had to play the rock and roll stuff, the R&B. They called it rock and roll.
Yeah.
So
at this time, you're working some versatility into your styling.
Right. So I got that together, and I get to work on the shows, and I get to see Etta James when we come out here, and all the different when she was young, and so I get to see all these different people.
Yeah.
Pardon me. And I'm listening to all the different people play.
Yeah.
But I got tired because it was called the Chitlin Circuit. Because one time we were here in Los Angeles. We had to be in Little Rock, Arkansas the next night.
Oh,
the
wow.
next day, we made it just in time. They'd be burning the cars, doing 120.
Well, and I was just going to say, you should clarify for our young audience, you weren't flying some record company jet or anything.
We never flew.
Or the promoter. You're all stuffed in a van, I'm imagining, or something, right? Yeah.
And so it was pretty rough. And I got tired of that because, you would be on tour for a year, but we might work our way up from Florida to Seattle, Washington, and then you had to go cross. It was, it was a good experience, but I would never want to do that again.
Right.
And so I came back home, and I started playing jazz again. Well, I played with my brother and them for a minute, and then the jazz organs got famous. People like Jimmy Smith and all this.
Right.
So I got myself to where I could play that stuff, and I started doing that. For a stretch, I played with a duo. It was just me and a guitar player, and I learned all the standards, that they call the standard songs, the Fly Me to the Moons and What Kind of Fool I Am and all these different things. I learned all the chords, and because I could sing, so he would teach me all these. So I had what they call a cocktail set. I'd do this and sing, and he would
how cool
do what he would do. And so when they made that call that we were talking about 30 minutes ago, when my friend said, "Come on out," I came out.
Yeah.
And it was pretty rough until I met this. I worked with a group called the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band, who had quite a few hits. And I was a singer. I sang a song called Loveland that was a big pop record, and I didn't get, I didn't know anything about the business.
Right.
That's another thing. Everybody should please learn the business. Please
learn the business. Yeah. And remember that it is a business.
Yeah, because I sang this song, and I was one of the writers. And
but you didn't get any publishing or
I didn't get nothing,
like
but got talked to really bad about that. And
but I want to touch on, if we could just make a little detour. I mentioned to you on the phone that when we saw you play the other night, your voice, he sung while he was playing the drums, which was just great. Your voice sounded like you were still 30 years old. I know you're 45 now, but your voice sounded like you were 30 years old. It was wild.
Well, that's a blessing.
It was great.
That's a blessing. Maybe because I haven't utilized it as much as I wanted to. When that happened with the Watts Band situation, we had some other records besides Loveland. Express Yourself was a big record. I think Do Your Thing was the first record that went gold. We didn't know anything about it. I don't have any gold records of it. And I was in that band, and a lot of things went gold. But we ain't gonna talk about that. I'm writing a book, so
Okay.
you get to see that.
And I was going to say, you take away the most valuable thing, which is the experience.
Yeah.
And the enrichment it gave
Right,
your
but
life.
it
Full record
bothered-
would
it
be nice,
bothered
but
me.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Psychologically, it bothered me. I didn't
Yeah.
sing for about 10 years.
really?
I mean, and the songs were high. He would want me to sing the songs too high, and it kept me hoarse. I would stay hoarse for almost 2 years. But, I came out of it. I got that, and I met Bill Withers through this gentleman.
Oh, okay.
This gentleman was managing Bill. I met him, and we became friends. We went in, Bill and I, and a famous jazz player, I can't think of his name now, he played with the Three Sounds. We went in the studio the first time. Did nothing happen because nobody knew what was going on. But I met Bill. And one of the gentlemen that was in the Watts band, he and Bill started working together after that. And but he didn't get to do Booker T. Jones, the famous Booker T. and the MGs.
Yeah.
He produced Bill's first album, was called.
We're getting calls already. If it's for me, I'm not
turn
here.
this
I'm
off.
not here if it's for me.
Sorry.
That's okay.
And he produced that album. Booker T did Ain't No Sunshine, which was a big record, which
Yeah.
busted Bill out. And
And so that everybody is clear on that song, will you sing the title of the song?
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone.
That's the song you played on. That's
So
amazing.
I didn't play on that one.
Oh, okay.
I didn't play. That was the guy from Stax. That was
Oh,
Stephen
yeah.
Stills and all of those
Right.
people. Stephen Stills
Right.
and
But he is from that
Yeah.
song. Yeah.
right. So what happened was Booker T got busy to do the Stardust album.
Willie
Willie Nelson.
Nelson?
Yeah, Booker T got an opportunity, I guess, because Bill's album hit.
Right.
So he was busy. He didn't want to do the second album. So we right in here, we came in here with Bill, and we worked it out, and did the second album, and it was history from there.
Yeah.
It took off, and things got a little strange for me, and I decided that the cat called me. They started calling me. That was when the guy saw me one day. He said, "Man, can you read music?" I said, "Yeah." So I started doing recording sessions. I worked with Bill, I think about a month after that. I went to Vegas and came back, but I started doing these recording sessions. And I got into the recording business.
Cool.
And that was, that was the extent of it. And, I've got to play with so many people.
That's awesome.
I've played with, from Barbra Streisand to Paul McCartney to,
Oh, cool.
I didn't get to play with Jimmy Reed on records, but I did see him live.
Right.
I almost got to play with him. All the kings, like you said, the BB
Yeah.
and Albert and
Freddie.
yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about recording because on the other side of the wall there, you've got a really interesting control room. We're going to do
Right.
that in just a moment.
Okay.
I want to backtrack to a question that I think you were building up to at one point, and it took you down a different road. But were there, and then I'm going to have you sign something special.
Okay.
Were there one or two drummers, whether it was from your jazz influence or your R&B and blues influence, were there one or two drummers that you really admired and picked up a few things and emulated from?
Well, I was still really rough around the edges as far as trying to play R&B from the jazz. I still had the jazz because the jazz was like what they call straight ahead. It wasn't really a R&B pocket situation. And I didn't know too much about that. A famous drummer who's by the name, his name was Paul Humphreys.
Yeah.
I'd go around to the studios just to check and see things, and to watch and see what people were doing.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey man, come here." And he said, "You see this music up here? I don't know why it was just a blessing." And I could understand it after he played what was happening. He said that's about the size of it. So he played and I could see what was happening. And it kind of set me into the right direction because I was so jazz influenced. I was almost free in Kansas City. I played the free stuff too.
Right.
So when I came out here, it was still, the Watts band gentleman fired me for 5 times.
Whoa, really?
And he couldn't get nobody else. So he said, "Hey, just keep time. Don't play no fields, just keep time." So
That was
I kept
Mr.
time.
Wright, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kept time, and I came up with that was the turn point. I came up with my own style because I couldn't really hear what the R&B drummers were doing. It just didn't. occur to me.
There wasn't anything real identifiable to you?
Right.
Okay.
And so I started, once you're playing simple, you start hearing certain things. And so the 16 notes came because I said, man, I can't hardly just do this and keep time. So I had to add the 16 notes came, and I started experimenting with different things. And you hear that stuff with the Use Me that I did with Bill Withers and Kissing My Love and the different things like that. Yeah. So I started getting more freer with it. Right. And some of the things with the Watts on the Third Street Rhythm Band too. Express Yourself was a one.
Very cool.
But I developed my own style, which I would say to all the drummers out there, listen to what everybody is doing and learn that. And I did, because there's so many great drummers. I mean, it's so many great drummers.
Oh, yeah.
And I listen to everybody that I really do. I still do. And but from that, try to take something for yourself and try to develop something.
Right. We'll cut and we'll bring the audience into your control room. Okay. And we'll talk briefly as we close out the show on using some old style gear to record in a new fashion of today's technique, but in using that old style gear to ensure that old style sound that's so warm. So we'll do that, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so now we're on the other side of the control room in James Gadsden's studio, and we were chatting a little bit earlier off camera about this. You have some really nostalgic equipment in here that is, I think, guys would buy just to collect and have around, but you're using it.
Well, the sound is still so great.
He's got a board that was a Motown board.
Right, I have this console that I purchased from Smokey Robinson. This is one of the consoles that they used when they moved to Los Angeles, California.
Wow.
I purchased the 16-track machine from Marvin Gaye.
Wow, a 16-track tape for you youngsters. Yes, music was actually recorded onto tape. 16-track. Well, a lot of them don't know. They've never seen it, that you got from Marvin Gaye.
I purchased it from Marvin.
Did he run an ad in the recycler? Or
well, he just had some things that he was trying to get rid of at his home, and that was one of them.
Yeah. That's cool. And what kind of stuff do you... Well, before I ask you what kind of stuff you do in here, what is the process? Are you recording analog and digital? Do you record analog, run it through digital? Well, I see you got a Mac here. You mentioned Pro Tools earlier.
Right, I got a little Pro Tools system. Well, it's according to what one would want. Mm-hmm. I don't do too many... What's the big thing now for a lot of the drummers is that people would email them something to play, and you play it, Pro Tools or whatever software you're using, and you send it back.
Digitize it and
right.
email
I
it
do
back.
it. I don't really like to do it. Mm-hmm. I do it for certain people because a lot of times a person might not know what they want. They might accept what you give them, but that might not have been the situation.
Right.
So I was kind of shy away from it. I do it, but I don't do it. But some people might want analog. They might want to come in and cut on the analog thing, especially the rap stuff, because they get a heavier, thicker sound.
And the bass. Yeah.
Then they move it to the Pro Tools. You can transfer it to the Pro Tools, work on it, and sometimes they keep it there.
And it's easier to edit in Pro Tools. You don't have to get the razor blade out.
Right.
So I can see that being an
sometimes they do that, and sometimes they'll bring it back to analog and mix it. So, or they'll do all the Pro Tools stuff.
Right.
So it's,
cool.
It's whatever. I personally still like the way the analog sounds, the saturation.
Yeah.
I played a lot of different times, and what happened was, a lot of times with the Pro Tools, not knocking it because it's good, but this is just one thing that happened. You can play something sometimes, and it might not come back the same way because it's in numbers.
Yeah.
It might be the zillionth of something.
Right.
Where in the analog thing, it saturates.
Yeah.
So whatever performance, that's why a lot of the old records you hear certain people wonder, how did they do that? Certain things, the magic. It saturates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Very cool. And what kind of stuff do you do? Mainly R&B, or do you have other types of projects?
Everything. I did some stuff with Lana Del Rey.
Oh wow.
And Damien Rice. I've done D'Angelo, Barbra Streisand. I mean, that's the Temptations, Marvin Gaye. I love all of it. I like all of it. Country and Western, whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome.
City and Color. I'd never heard of them. They're from Canada, and he would work all over in the Scandinavian countries and everything. That was great. I mean, it's just great to just, for people to want to say, well, hey, I'd like for you to play on my record. That's just,
Oh yeah.
for me all the time, I
Yeah.
think it's a wonderful thing.
And that's why you drummers out there, you gotta learn to be versatile.
That's
You know?
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, thank you so much
Oh,
for
well, thank
coming
you.
on Drum Talk TV. And I think that this interview exemplifies, again, really what Drum Talk TV is all about. And really, James, I think when we first met, I told you this, that not all drum lessons happen behind a drum kit or at a practice pad. Many drum lessons can come, just like lessons in life, from having an open mind and listening to discussions from
Right.
somebody to express their perspectives based on their unique experiences. And someone like James Gadson, who's had just a wonderful long career playing in so many different situations with so many different people over so many years, hopefully there's some lessons in there that you all learned.
I
And,
still practice.
Good, that's really
I
good
still
advocation.
practice.
Yeah,
And I think you should, relax.
yeah.
If you're on the gig, go to the bathroom before you get in, so that you can be cool
Yeah.
when you're playing.
Yeah.
Everything is
And don't play tense, don't play rigid.
right. So
Just
you
relax.
can be relaxed.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again. I really
Thank
appreciate
you. I
it.
enjoyed doing this. Really.
Great.
All right.
Keep tuning in at www.drumtalktv.com. And right here is all of James Gadson's information, so you could follow him and keep up to date with what he's doing and what his career was built on. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dan Schinder with James Gadson here on Drum Talk TV.